Now that it's affecting the military itself and mega corporations like McDonald's, well, now they're acknowledging this as a widespread problem in Congress. Because when it affects their war making and other powerful corporations, when it affects the titans, they care. But sometimes in these battles of titans, we can win as a side effect, and that's what I'm hoping for here.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 300th episode of Congressional Dish, my listener-supported podcast. I am your host, Jennifer Briney. And for this milestone episode, I wanted to give you some information about a topic in which I have some hope. And so today's episode is about the right to repair. Because right now, we do not have a right to repair our belongings because a previous Congress decided to prioritize corporate rights over the rights of customers. Or at least that's what happened. I'm not sure that was intended. And to be honest, I am really into this topic, but it was actually Tom Merritt of the Daily Tech News Show who picked this topic because he invited me on the Daily Tech News Show on September 5th to talk about the right to repair being denied to our military and the current effort in this Congress to do something about that. But by jumping down this rabbit hole, I discovered that this issue affects every single one of us, and Congress is in the process of trying to identify the source of the problem and figure out what to do about it. But the problem itself is pretty clear. We do not have the right, in many instances, to repair the items that we buy and we own. We can't fix them ourselves, and we can't hire the person that we want to fix them for us in many cases. Instead, corporations that make products are requiring us to pay them over and over again to fix those products, charging whatever they want because they legally have no competition in repairs. Or they're requiring us to go to specific repair companies that they have a business relationship with. And this situation is happening right now because companies are using, or perhaps misusing, intellectual property laws. And as the topic of my Daily Tech News Show appearance suggests, this isn't just affecting insignificant peasants like you and I, because the broad category of customer also includes other companies, some of them also giant multinational corporations, and our government, the military in particular. And God forbid anything stand in the way of our ability to conduct wars on behalf of corporate powers. And so, our Congress is actually looking into this issue, and there are solutions floating around. There are bills floating around. And there is one provision that I actually think has a chance of becoming law this year. And I know all of this because in preparation for my appearance on the Daily Tech News Show, I watched a hearing from last year about our missing right to repair our own belongings. And it was a refreshingly productive hearing. Because while there was a lively debate about the topic and the section of the law that is currently denying us the right to repair our own purchases, this hearing was almost entirely free of partisan nonsense. And I think that's one of the reasons I feel motivated to share this information with you today. Because as we are about 6 weeks out from the 2024 election, all the corporate press is treating us to lately is partisan nonsense. But this episode is not about politics, it's about policy, much like this entire podcast is, actually. But this episode is about a policy with a real chance of being improved. Maybe. What I'm saying is that there's hope. And I don't know about you, but I need some tangible hope in politics right now. Because if Congress were to legally grant us, and corporations and small businesses and the government, the right to repair our belongings, it would almost certainly save all of us money. Well, except for the shareholder class, which is the only group of people who substantially benefit from creating monopoly situations. But for most of us, those of us who work for our livings and don't sit on our lazy asses on our yachts living off of unearned wealth via dividends, for most of us in that category, gaining a legal right to repair our stuff would almost certainly allow us to keep more of our actually hard-earned money in our pockets. And so, in this episode, I'm going to rearrange the testimony that I heard in that fascinating hearing and add a few extra bits for you. But I'm going to present you that debate today in a format that isn't miserable to listen to. Because watching a hearing is weird. They ask their questions out of order. And so today I'm going to make that whole debate a lot easier for you to listen to. And so to get us started, let's jump into that House Judiciary hearing that took place last summer titled, "Is There a Right to Repair?" And we're going to start with some testimony from this guy.
My name is Devlin Hartline, and I'm a legal fellow at the Hudson Institute's Forum for Intellectual Property.
And this guy is a total ideologue when it comes to intellectual property rights for corporations. Because before he joined the Hudson Institute in 2021, he spent 7 years at the Center for the Protection of Intellectual Property. And so basically, when you hear that voice today, you're going to be hearing the voice of the advocate for the corporations who are denying customers the right to repair the items that we buy. And so to start this debate, we're going to start with him. And here's some of his testimony in the House Judiciary Committee on July 18th, 2023.
I'd like to start with the question posed by the title of this hearing: is there a right to repair? And the answer is clearly no. A right is a legally enforceable claim against another, but the courts have not recognized that manufacturers have the duty to help consumers make repairs. Instead, the courts have said that while we have the ability to repair our things, we also have the duty not to infringe the IP rights in the process. So it is in fact the manufacturers who have the relevant rights, not consumers.
See, he's fighting for corporate rights. And he continued defending corporate intellectual property rights as he sees them.
IP owners are merely exercising their federally protected IP rights, and this is not actionable anti-competitive conduct. It is instead how the IP system is supposed to work. We grant IP owners exclusive rights so they can exclude others, and this in turn promotes the investments to create and to commercialize these creative innovations in the marketplace, and that promotes the public good. Right to repair supporters want lawmakers to force manufacturers to make the tools, parts, and know-how needed to facilitate repairs available to consumers and independent repair shops. And the assumption here is that anything standing in the way of repair opportunities must necessarily harm the public good. But these tools, parts, and know-how are often protected by IP rights, such as copyrights and design patents. And we protect copyrighted works and patented inventions because, as the Constitution recognizes, this promotes the public good. We reward creators and innovators as an incentive for them to bring these things to the marketplace. And the public benefits from the introduction of new products and services that increase competition. Thus, the right to repair movement isn't based on a pre-existing right. It's instead asking lawmakers to create a new right at the expense of the existing rights of IP owners.
But the other witnesses in this hearing, all of the other witnesses in fact, see things differently.
My name is Aaron Perzanowski. I am a professor of law at the University of Michigan. And for the last 15 years, my academic research has focused on the intersection of personal and intellectual property rights in the digital economy. During that time, the right to repair has emerged as a central challenge to the notion that we as consumers control the devices that we buy. Instead, consumers, farmers, small businesses all find that manufacturers exert post-sale control over these devices, often in ways that frustrate repair. Repair is as old as humanity. Our Paleolithic ancestors repaired hand axes and other primitive tools. And as our technologies have grown more complex, from the Bronze Age through the Renaissance to the high-tech devices that we all have in our pockets here today, repair has always kept pace. But today, manufacturers are employing a range of strategies that restrict repair, from their hardware and software design choices to clampdowns on secondary markets. And we also troublingly see attempts to leverage IP rights as tools to restrict repair. These efforts are a major departure from the historical treatment of repair under the law. The right to repair is not only consistent with nearly 2 centuries of IP law in the United States, it reflects half a millennium of common law property doctrine that rejects post-sale restrictions on personal property. As early as the 15th century, English property law recognized that once a property owner sells an item, efforts to restrain how the new owner of that item can use it are inconsistent with the essential nature of private property and obnoxious to public policy. As the Supreme Court has repeatedly recognized, IP law's respect for the property interests of purchasers of copyrighted and patented goods was profoundly shaped by this common law tradition. In 1850, the Supreme Court recognized that the repair of a patented machine reflected, quote, no more than the exercise of that right of care which everyone may use to give duration to that which he owns. A century later, the court held that the repair of a convertible car roof was justified as an exercise of, quote, the lawful right of the property owner to repair his property. And just a few years ago, the court reaffirmed the rejection of post-sale restrictions under patent law in Impression Products versus Lexmark, a case about refurbishing printer ink cartridges. Copyright law, not surprisingly, has had fewer occasions to consider repair restrictions, but as early as 1901, the Seventh Circuit recognized, quote, a right of repair or renewal under U.S. copyright law. When a publisher sued to prevent a used book dealer from repairing and replacing damaged components of books, the court said that, quote, the right of ownership in the book carries with it and includes the right to maintain the book as nearly as possible in its original condition. A century after that, Congress itself acknowledged repair as a right that owners enjoy regardless of copyright restrictions when it enacted Section 117C of the Copyright Act. That provision was designed to undo a Ninth Circuit decision that allowed copyright holders to prevent third-party repairs of computers. Section 117C explicitly permits owners of machines to make copies of computer programs in the course of maintenance or repair. And finally, the U.S. Copyright Office over the last decade has repeatedly concluded that diagnosis, repair, and maintenance activities are non-infringing when it comes to vehicles, consumer devices, and medical equipment. So the right to repair is firmly rooted in basic principles of U.S. IP law.
And the captain of Team Corporate, Devlin Hartline, had no rebuttal to that history lesson from Professor Persnowski, but he did have a rebuttal to one of those examples.
He cited a case about where you can repair a cover on a book. That's very different than recreating the book, every single word in it, right? So there's a difference between repairing something and then crossing the line into violating the exclusive rights of IP owners in the patented product or the copyrighted book. And so the things that repair supporters are asking for is that, okay, if somebody has a design patent that covers an auto body part, well, they have the right to exclude other people from making that part. But repair supporters say, they shouldn't have that exclusive right because, you know, we could increase competition if we just took away their design patent and now other people could make that part, and so that's competition. But that's not the type of competition that IP law and competition law seek to support. That's like saying if we just let the Pirate Bay copy and distribute all of the Disney blockbuster movies, then that's competition and prices would go down. But that's not the way that we do it, right? So competition means other people come up with new products and new services. And so that's what we should be trying to support.
But according to the other witnesses, coming up with new products and new services are precisely what is being prevented by the companies that are using intellectual property laws to prevent repairs in ways that are relatively new.
My name is Paul Roberts, and I'm the founder of Secure Repairs. We're an organization of more than 350 cybersecurity and information technology professionals who support the right to repair. But my understanding is the use of design patents has increased dramatically, even exponentially, in the last 10 to 15 years. If you go back to the 90s or 80s, parts makers, automakers were not applying these types of patents to replaceable parts like bumpers and rear view mirrors. Somebody had a business decision that if you can do so, then we can capture more of that aftermarket by outlawing identical aftermarket replacements. That has a huge downstream impact on car owners and on insurers and on all of us.
And so here's how this is playing out in the real world. This next witness didn't introduce himself, but his name is Kyle Wiens, and he is the co-founder and CEO of iFixit. Basically, this guy is a Cal Poly educated engineer with marketable skills in fixing things, but he's being prevented from marketing his skills. And so here's some of his story as told to Representative Russell Fry of South Carolina, starting with the roadblocks that he's encountered trying to fix McDonald's notoriously always broken ice cream machines.
So these ice cream machines are made by a tailor, and there is an incredibly complex Baroque set of touchscreens you have to go through, and then there's a service password that you have to be able to get past in order to access the settings that really allow you to do what you want. And so in an ideal world, you'd have an entrepreneur who would come along and make a tool to make it easier for McDonald's. Maybe they'd have an app on their phone that they could use to configure and help them diagnose and repair the machine. Unfortunately, the company who made that tool is struggling legally because of all of these challenges. Across the board, if we had innovation outside of the manufacturers and to be able to develop new tools for fixing ice cream machines or anything else, you'd have a whole flowering ecosystem of repair tools. Right now, it doesn't exist. The U.S. is like this black hole where innovation is banned in software repair. I can't, there's all kinds of opportunities I could see. I had a farmer ask me for help fixing his John Deere tractor, and I had to say I can't do that particular repair because it's illegal. I'd love to build a cool app for helping him diagnose and fix his tractor and get back in the field faster. We don't have that marketplace right now. It's like farmers have been forced to use cracked Ukrainian versions of John Deere's diagnostic software.
Right, so it's not, it's not just ice cream machines. I led off with that, but it's farmers, it's farm equipment, it's iPhones, it's somebody's Xbox, right? These are all things, in your experience, what are the challenges that these customers and stakeholders face when they're trying to repair their own devices? What are some things that they face?
It's absolutely infuriating. If you're so my friend, farmer in San Luis Obispo, Dave grows all kinds of amazing products. He has a $300,000 John Deere tractor. Came to me and said, "Hey, there's a bad sensor. It's going to take a week to get that sensor sent out from Indiana, and I need to use the tractor in that time. Will you help me bypass the sensor?" I could hypothetically modify the software in the tractor to do that. Practically, I didn't have the legal ability. And so he had to go and rent an expensive tractor for the week. This is impacting people's lives every single day.
And then he added this example a few minutes later.
So another farmer in my town, he showed me how if he has a transmission go out on a truck, he can fix that. But if he has a transmission go out on his John Deere tractor, he can't. He can physically install the transmission, but he can't program it to make it work. I'd love to be able to make a software tool to enable him to replace his transmission.
And for you and I, when that farmer has to stop his work for a week because of an inability to fix his own tractor, that has ripple effects. Here's law professor Perzanowski.
In a lot of instances, this conversation, and we've touched on this earlier, focuses on cost savings, right? And cost savings are an important consideration, right? Farmers aren't thrilled that they have to pay a technician from the John Deere dealer to drive maybe hours to get to their farm and connect their laptop and download these payload files to enable their equipment to work. But in the agricultural space, the thing I hear most often in the conversations I have with farmers is, and Kyle touched on this a bit earlier, is a real concern about the time sensitivity of their work. If your tractor is out of commission for a week or two in the wrong part of the season, that is going to have disastrous effects, right? Not only on that farm's economic outlook, but collectively it can have an impact, not to be hyperbolic here, but on our national food supply. And so I think it's really important that farmers have flexibility in terms of where and how they execute repairs so that they can get their equipment back up and running. If my laptop breaks and I can't get it fixed for a week or two, I'm annoyed. There will be emails that go unanswered, but the world will continue to spin. That is not the case in the agricultural space, where I think we have to be much more concerned.
And as far as you and I are concerned, delays that lead to spoiled food and unnecessarily expensive repairs, well, those delays limit our food supply and the repair costs are passed down to us customers. Both actions that increase the prices that we pay at the grocery store or the restaurant. This affects everyone who eats food, and I think that matters when we're talking about what policies further the public good. I also think that this might trump, absolutely no pun intended, but this might trump the public good argument of letting corporations limit who can repair the devices that they make. Here's Mr. Fix-It, Kyle Wiens, who is the CEO of iFixit.
You think about what is local, what is American Main Street? You have a post office and a repair shop, and unfortunately, we've seen the whittling down of Main Street as the TV repair shops went away when the manufacturers cut off access to schematics, as the camera repair shops went away when Nikon and Canon decided to stop selling them parts. We've seen this systematically across the economy. In the enterprise space, you have Oracle and IBM saying that you can't get security updates to critical cyber infrastructure unless you buy a service contract with them. So they're tying long-term service contracts with the security updates that are necessary to keep this infrastructure secure.
But what happens if a manufacturer decides that they aren't interested in servicing their own products for the long term? Here's cybersecurity expert Paul Roberts.
One point I would just make is that with the Internet of Things, right, we are facing a crisis in the very near future as manufacturers of everything from home appliances to personal electronics to equipment, as those products age and those manufacturers walk away from their responsibility to maintain them. So we're no longer supporting the software, we're no longer issuing security updates. Who will step in to maintain those devices, keep them secure, keep them operating, right? The manufacturers walked away. Do we just get rid of them? No, because the equipment still works perfectly. We're going to need a market-based response to that. We're going to need small businesses to step up and say, hey, I'll keep that Samsung dishwasher working for another 20 years. That's a huge economic opportunity for this country, but we cannot do it in the existing system because of the types of restrictions that we're talking about. And so this is really about enabling a secure future in which when you buy a dishwasher with a 20-year lifespan or 25-year lifespan, it's going to last that 25 years, not the 5 to 6 years that the manufacturer has decided, that's how long we want to support the software for.
And for an explanation of how corporations are able to patent essential updates like that, here's Representative Hank Johnson of Georgia speaking first to Mr. Corporate, Devlin Hartline, and then to the law professor, Professor Aaron Perzanovsky.
Are software updates new creations and thus copyrightable?
Software updates, yeah, they're computer programs, and so Congress said explicitly in 1980, but it was understood before then that computer programs are literary works, and they're protected just like any other copyrighted work.
Thank you, Mr. Professor Perzanovsky. Do you disagree?
I don't disagree at all that software updates are protectable subject matter under the Copyright Act. But what I think is important to keep in mind, right, is the Copyright Act and copyright's exclusive rights and all of the exceptions and limitations to copyright's exclusive rights are created by Congress. And so if you think those rights are interfering with other important issues and concerns, then I think Congress clearly has the power to make changes to the copyright law in order to best serve what you ultimately determine to be in the public interest.
And he had a suggestion for what Congress could do.
Access to firmware and other code is really essential to the functioning and repair of lots of devices. I think there are some important differences between the standard essential patent context and kind of what we're talking about here, in that in the standard essential patent context, we're relying on standard setting bodies to identify technologies and to require companies to license their patents under fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms. We don't quite have that infrastructure in place in the copyright context, but what we do have are compulsory licenses that exist within the Copyright Act already, one of which you were alluding to earlier, the mechanical license for musical works. We also have compulsory licenses for retransmissions of satellite and broadcast content that essentially say the copyright owner is entitled to compensation of some form, but they're not entitled to prevent people from using or accessing that underlying work. And I think that could be a useful framework here for getting owners of devices access to the firmware that they need.
And this issue of software updates and access to software information, there is one particular product that we're able to get repaired right now because of state laws, but there is a clearly identifiable threat to our right to repair our own cars looming in the not too distant future. And in fact, for some of us, that future is probably now. Here's Paul Roberts, the cybersecurity expert and editor-in-chief of the Security Ledger.
Right now, this is not an urgent issue because most of the cars out there are older vehicles. As we move forward, as telematics systems evolve, as automakers continue their trend of moving more and more information to telematics systems, this is going to become a bigger problem. I'll point out another problem, which is the Massachusetts law is contingent on data transfers of diagnostic and repair information via the OBD or onboard diagnostic 2 port under the dashboard. That's only there because of federal clean air law. Electronic vehicles don't have that port because they don't have emissions. And so in the very near future, as we shift to electronic vehicles, that data access port will no longer be there. It will all be telematics data. And so the utility of the Massachusetts law is going to decline over time going forward. And again, when you start talking about right to repair, you become like this crazy person who talks about right to repair every time it comes up. But one thing I try and stress to people when I talk to them about auto repair is if you live in Michigan or California and you have taken your vehicle to the local independent repair shop, you have only done that because the voters in Massachusetts passed a ballot measure over a decade ago and then updated it in November 2020. That is the very thin thread that our right to use independent auto repair hangs by in this country. That's not the way it's supposed to be. This is something that affects vehicle owners, hundreds of millions of them in all 50 states, and it's a type of thing that the federal government needs to address with federal legislation. It should not hang by this very thin thread.
And it's not just our vehicles that can't be repaired without new federal legislation. This is also affecting our military. And this affecting our military is relatively new, according to Captain L. Ekman, a logistics officer in the U.S. Marine Corps who made this issue mainstream when she published an op-ed in the New York Times in 2019. But she says that from approximately the 1940s through the 1970s, the Defense Department paid for its own research and development and therefore owned the right to repair their equipment without question. But starting in the 1970s, which in story after story that I research, seems to be the starting point of the privatization of everything in this country. Well, starting in the 1970s, the Department of Defense instead funneled money to corporations who are now doing the research and development of their products, and therefore it's the corporations that own the intellectual property rights instead of the military. Then, in the 1990s, during the Clinton years, federal acquisition regulations were changed to allow the purchase of commercial items, so items from companies, to be exempted from a large portion of the military's purchasing rules, along with a change to the definition of commercial item to include things which are specialized military tools, as opposed to things you and I would buy like pencils and ashtrays. And in this era of the private sector is always better thinking, Congress encouraged federal agencies to buy from companies to the maximum extent possible instead of making their own stuff in-house. And the result has been a massive power shift. The Defense Department, because they can only get what they need from a small number of companies, or in some cases just one company, have had to just accept high prices, warranty terms, and repair provisions that limit the military's ability to fix their own shit. The same problems the rest of us who buy things from for-profit corporations are dealing with. And this is true, even though the Defense Department has the power to negotiate their contracts with these corporations in a way that us peasants generally do not. But that power is useless if the DoD chooses not to use it. And that choice seems to be made often. And I suspect that might have something to do with the fact that lately the Department of Defense has been headed by the same exact humans who worked for the very corporations that are price gouging the military for profit, and who own gobs of stock in those corporations, and who know that they have jobs lined up at those corporations when they finish up their government work. Because now seems like a good time to remind you that our current Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, was on the board at Raytheon before becoming the most powerful person in the military. The Defense Secretary before him, Mark Esper, was a vice president in Raytheon's lobbying division before taking the Defense Secretary job. The Defense Secretary before him, Patrick Shanahan, he was a former Boeing executive. And the Defense Secretary before him, James Mattis, was on the board of directors at the Defense Corporation General Dynamics. And by the way, he went right back to General Dynamics after leaving the Trump administration. And in that gig, he currently makes over $300,000 per year, much of that in company stock. And I'm assuming that pay was similar when he was on the board the first time. Just to let you know how much money we're talking about here when they're on these boards. And I could go on listing more employees from the Defense Department that have served on corporate boards, but you get the idea. And the effects of the military lacking the right to repair their equipment are wide-ranging. Because obviously there are high costs associated with shipping items back to the manufacturers or shipping employees of the manufacturers to the military, instead of empowering our service members to fix their own stuff. Reliance on contractors is expensive and slow, and it affects our military's readiness and efficiency. But perhaps more importantly, members of the military are losing opportunities to practice repair skills that they may need if their equipment breaks down on the battlefield, when their lives are in danger. And on top of that, members of the military often would get jobs as repair experts upon leaving the military, opportunities which are closing for them now that they get no experience in repairs as members of the military. And so for those of us who care about the troops, who love people in the military and want them to be alive and to thrive, this is a support the troops issue. They shouldn't be prohibited from fixing their own trucks when on an IED-dotted road while dodging enemy fire. But that's precisely the kind of dangers that they are being put in because of monopoly powers. And because of that, some of us who don't get paid in hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stock in Raytheon, Boeing, and General Dynamics consider this situation a bad thing. And one of those people includes Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, who brought this up in a May 16th hearing to the Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro.
So the Navy acquires everything from night vision goggles to aircraft carriers through contracts with big defense contractors. But the contractors often place restrictions on these deals that prevent service members from maintaining or repairing the equipment, won't even let them write a training manual without going back through the contractor. Now, the contractors say that since they own the intellectual property and the technical data underlying the equipment, only they have the right to repair that equipment. These right to repair restrictions usually translate into much higher costs for DoD, which has no choice but to shovel money out to big contractors whenever DoD needs to have something fixed. So take the Navy's Littoral Combat Ship. General Dynamics and Lockheed Martin considered much of the data and equipment on the ship to be proprietary. So the Navy had to delay missions and spend millions of dollars on travel costs just so that contractor-affiliated repairmen could fly in rather than doing this ourselves. Secretary Del Toro, when a sailor isn't allowed to repair part of their ship at sea and a Marine isn't allowed to access technical data to fix a generator on a base abroad, One solution is for the Navy to buy the intellectual property from the contractors. So can you say a little bit about what the benefits are of the Navy having technical rights for the equipment that it has purchased?
The benefits are enormous, Senator, and we've actually had tremendous success, I'd say, in the last year and a half to 2 years through the taxpayer advocacy program that we initiated when I came in. There have been 3 examples. One, gaining the intellectual property rights for the new ACV class of ships that will replace the AAVs. The F-35 negotiations really proved themselves out in a significant way as well, too. And lastly, the 20 F-18 ENFs that the Congress authorized in 22 and 23. We were able to make significant gains in terms of the government finally getting the intellectual property rights that were necessary for us to be able to properly sustain those moving forward.
So I am very, very glad to hear this. I like the Taxpayer Advocacy Project and how you're training contract officers to secure technical equipment that the Navy buys. But I think you should have the support of Congress on this. Senator Braun and I have introduced the Stop Price Gouging the Military Act to give DoD more tools to get cost and pricing data so that you will be in a better position to negotiate better deals with the contractors. There's also more that we can do to ensure that the Navy and the rest of the services have the rights they need to bolster readiness. So let me ask you, Secretary Del Toro, would having a stronger focus on right to repair issues during the acquisition process, like prioritizing contract bids that give DoD fair access to repair materials and ensuring that contract officers are looking into buying technical rights early on, would that help the Navy save costs and boost readiness at the same time?
Very much so, Senator. In fact, one of the things that we have prioritized since I came in as Secretary of the Navy, given my acquisition background, is actually those negotiations need to happen as early as possible. Before we even, as we develop the acquisition strategy for that contract, to go out to bid. And by doing so, we will reap tremendous returns.
So the military, or at least the Navy, is starting to demand what they need in contract negotiations in order to do their own repairs. But 2 things. 1, this dynamic still gives the power in the negotiations to the war things manufacturers, essentially putting our government in the position of having to ask pretty please. Because many contracts for the military are so-called sole source contracts, as in the item can only be bought from one source, and so that source, that company, gets the contract because, duh. But what if that corporation simply says no to these contract terms and the military just has to deal with it because they truly need the product? Without ensuring customer rights in law, even the military is left vulnerable to monopoly powers. And 2, I can't stop thinking about Ecuador. Remember that episode? It's in the show notes for you, along with every source that I used to research this episode, and then some, because my amazing assistant Claire adds info for you in the show notes too. And we'd appreciate your financial support for this podcast if you appreciate being given sources, which is something that podcasters rarely dedicate time and money towards providing for you, leading to a wide range of bullshittery in this space. So please support Congressional Dish, and I'll keep doing it, and we'll keep the ads out. But anyway, the catalyst for the Ecuador episode was a provision about Ecuador that I saw in the NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act for 2023. And in that provision, one of the details that I noticed was that we gave 2 ships, we gifted them, each worth $65 million to Ecuador. But that gift included strings, repair strings. Because even though those ships would no longer be ours and would be stationed in and used in a country in South America, the ships, which are notorious for breaking down, are required to be repaired at a specific shipyard in the United States. And so every time something breaks, they have to ship the whole ship to the US and back to Ecuador. And that is expensive and wasteful because a lot of fossil fuels need to be burned to unnecessarily ship combat ships back and forth. And the thing is that provision can't be blamed on the manufacturers. I mean, maybe it can because of the lobbying and the campaign cash used to buy influence with our corrupt members of Congress. But it was written into the NDAA by Congress that the president would be required to force Ecuador to schlep the ships back and forth to the U.S. for any repairs as a condition for receiving this gift. like a corrupt jobs program, which tells me that Congress isn't exactly against the idea of enriching corporations by preventing repairs. But now that it's affecting the military itself and mega corporations like McDonald's, well, now they're acknowledging this is a widespread problem in Congress. Because when it affects their war making and other powerful corporations, when it affects the titans, they care. But sometimes in these battles of titans, we can win as a side effect, and that's what I'm hoping for here. And the good news is that the problem provision in our current law, the part of the law that is allowing these situations to exist, that is crystal clear. And so here's Michigan Law School professor Aaron Perzanowski, and in this clip, you're going to hear him use an abbreviation, DMCA, and that stands for the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which, by the way, passed Congress without any recorded votes, meaning it was considered completely uncontroversial, and it was signed into law by President Clinton in 1998.
Section 1201 of the DMCA makes it practically impossible for consumers to exercise their lawful right to repair a wide range of devices, from tractors to home electronics, even though the Copyright Office says those activities are non-infringing. And the weakening of standards for design patents allow firms to choke off the supply of replacement parts needed to repair vehicles, home appliances, and other devices.
And here's cybersecurity expert Paul Roberts.
Section 1201 has also enabled what one researcher has described as dark patterns in the design and manufacture of hardware. That includes everything from locking out customers from access to administrative interfaces, administrative features of the products that they own, as well as practices like part pairing, which Kyle will talk to you more about, in which manufacturers couple replaceable components like screens and sensors and cameras to specific device hardware. Such schemes make manufacturers and their authorized repair providers gatekeepers for repairs and effectively bar competition from the owners of the devices as well as independent repair providers.
And for more on the effects of Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, here's Representative Ben Klein of Virginia speaking to Professor Perzanowski.
How does Section 1201 of the DMCA impact the ability of consumers and independent repair shops to modify or repair devices that have proprietary software and data in the consumer electronics industry?
Thank you so much for the question. As we've been talking about, the Copyright Office in 2015, 2018, 2021, and they're in the process for the current rulemaking, has determined that engaging in circumvention, the removal or bypassing of these digital locks for purposes of repair is perfectly lawful behavior. But there is a major practical mismatch here between the legal rights that consumers enjoy under federal law today and their practical ability to exercise those rights. And that's because, as Devlin was just describing, the Section 1201 rulemaking does not extend to the creation or distribution of tools, right? So I have the right under federal law to remove the technological locks, say, on my video game console if I want to swap out a broken disk drive. How do I do that? I like to think of myself as a pretty technologically sophisticated person. I don't have the first clue about how to do that. I need a person who can write that code, make that code available to consumers so that I can. All I'm trying to do is swap out a broken disk drive on my video game.
But you would argue
console.
that code is proprietary, correct?
So I'm talking here about a third party making their own code, right?
Okay.
That is simply allowing me to engage in activity that the Copyright Office has repeatedly said is non-infringing.
Do you want to give them a map? Is that essentially what
Absolutely, yes, I do.
Do trade secrets play a role in the right to repair debate?
There are occasions where trade secrets are important. I don't think in the context that we're talking about here with Section 1201 that we're typically running into trade secret issues. The state level bills that have been introduced do typically address trade secrets and often have carve-outs there, and I think that's something worth considering in this debate. But I think it's important to keep in mind that, like, just because we have some hypothetical worry about some unknown bad actor taking a tool that I use to fix my video game console.
Well, it's not unknown. The Chinese do it all the time.
I don't think the Chinese are particularly worried about whether or not I can fix my video game console. And in fact, I think that point is important. But the bad actors already have these tools. All we're trying to do is get very targeted tools in the hands of law-abiding citizens who just want to repair the stuff they buy for their kids for Christmas, right? If the Chinese are going to hack the PlayStation, they've already done it.
And for the corporate side of this debate, Representative Gerald Nadler of New York directed some of his questions to Devlin Hartline of the Hudson Institute. And in this discussion, they're going to talk about a part of Section 1201 that has a process for the government to exempt some actions from the protections given to the corporations. And I don't think knowing the details of that process is all that important, other than to know that it only happens once every 3 years. But just know that in Hartline's answer, he's going to use an abbreviation, TPM, that I'm almost positive stands for Technological Protection Measures, which are things like passwords and encryption.
Repair advocates argue that Section 1201 prevents non-infringing circumvention of access controls for repair purposes. But Congress contemplated this use when it passed the DMCA in 1998, allowing for a triennial exemption process. Is the exemption process working as intended? And if not, are there actions Congress can take to expand exemptions or make them easier to acquire?
So what's important about the triennial rulemaking is that the proponent of an exemption has to come forward with evidence and demonstrate that there's actually a problem and it relates to a certain class of works, and then they can get a temporary exemption for 3 years. And so it is true that the Copyright Office, well, the Librarian of Congress has the few rulemakings has said that because using a copyrighted work in a way to for repair, maintenance, etc., is fair use, that they grant these exemptions. But these exemptions are quite narrow. They do not allow the trafficking of the computer programs that can crack the TPMs, and so it's very narrowly done. And the concern is that if you were to create a permanent exemption that opens things all the way up with access controls, copy controls, and trafficking thereof, is now you're getting to the point of why we even have these TPMs under 1201 in the first place, and that's because they guard against piracy. And so the concern is that you're opening the piracy floodgates, you make these devices less secure, and then content owners are going to be less likely to want to put their content on these devices.
So Mr. Corporate claims that the privacy floodgates would be opened and the devices would be vulnerable in terms of cybersecurity if permanent exemptions were granted for repair purposes. But cybersecurity expert Paul Roberts did not agree with the corporate think tank guy.
Also, we have yet to find any evidence that the types of information covered by right to repair laws, like schematic diagrams, service manuals, diagnostic software, and replacement parts, act as a portal to cyber attacks. The vast majority of attacks on internet-connected devices, from broadband routers to home appliances to automobiles, today exploit weaknesses in the embedded software produced and distributed by the manufacturers, or alternatively, weak device configuration. So they're deployed on the internet in ways that make them vulnerable to attack. These security weaknesses are an epidemic. A recent study of the security of Internet of Things devices by the company Phosphorus Labs, or a cybersecurity company, found that 68% of Internet of Things devices contained high-risk or critical software vulnerabilities. As an example, I'd like to call attention to the work of a group of independent researchers recently, led by Sam Curry, who published a report, and you can Google this, Web Hackers versus the Auto Industry, in January 2023. That group disclosed wide-ranging and exploitable flaws in vehicle telematics systems from 16 different auto manufacturers. At a leading GPS supplier to major automakers, the researchers claimed to obtain full access to a company-wide administration panel that gave them the ability to send arbitrary commands to an estimated 15.5 million vehicles, including vehicles used by first responders, police, fire, and so on. Hacks like this take place without any access to repair materials, nor is there any evidence that providing access to repair software will open the doors to new attacks.
And on top of that, it's not like the repair materials are closely guarded secrets now.
By definition, the information covered by right to repair laws is not sensitive or protected, as evidenced by the fact that the manufacturers already distribute it widely to hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of workers for their authorized repair providers. This could be everyone from mechanics working at auto dealerships to the folks staffing the Geek Squad at Best Buy.
And so, in general, in terms of cybersecurity,
for the last 25 years, Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act has given manufacturers an incentive to deploy software locks widely and to limit access to security researchers. That's kind of a model, what we call in cybersecurity, security through obscurity. In other words, by keeping the workings of something secret, you're making it secure. But in fact, that doesn't work because cyber criminals are very resourceful and they're very determined and they don't really care what the law says.
and on top of that, here's Mr. iFixit, Kyle Wiens, who actually fixes things.
One of the challenges with Section 1201, it doesn't just ban repair tools, it also bans the distribution of cybersecurity tools. And so we've seen security researchers, Apple sued a company that made security research tool under 1201. And that tool has markedly made the world more secure. It's very popular amongst government security researchers. So I think that's kind of the sweet spot is allow some third-party inspection. It'll make the product better.
And so bottom line, here's Paul Roberts, the expert in cybersecurity.
I'm speaking to you today on behalf of our members to make clear that the fair access to repair materials sought by right to repair laws does not increase cyber risk. And in fact, it can contribute to a healthier and more secure ecosystem of smart and connected devices.
And so experts, the people who do the actual repair work and the expert in cybersecurity, directly contradicted the validity of Mr. Corporate's fears for the future, which I find useful in judging whether to believe a single word he says. Anyway, back to the exemption process in the law that would theoretically allow the Copyright Office or Librarian of Congress to exempt products from Section 1201 and allow repairs. And whether or not the exemption process is proving adequate, here's Professor Perzanowski.
So the 1201 process is what established the legality of circumvention for repair purposes. But when Congress created that rulemaking authority, it only extends to the act of circumvention, right? The actual removal. Congress did not give the office or the librarian the authority to grant exemptions to the trafficking provisions. And that's where I think legislative intervention is really important.
Put another way, as I understand what he means by trafficking, there's no exemptions for creating and distributing tools to do the actual work once the passwords and encryptions or whatever are bypassed. And that's where the main problem is with the exemption process. And explaining how this is playing out in the real world was Mr. iFixit, Kyle Wiens.
Over the last decade plus, I've been working on Section 1201, trying to get exemptions for the ability to repair products. The challenge that we've had in the Section 1201 process, every triennial I go back and we ask for permission to be able to fix our own things, is that the exemptions we've gotten really only apply to individual consumers. They aren't something that I could use to make a tool to provide to one of you to fix yourself. So in order for someone to take advantage of a 1201 exemption that we have, they have to be a cybersecurity researcher and able to whittle their own tools and use it themselves, and that just doesn't scale.
And Congress didn't seem to intend this. Here's Representative Zoe Lofgren of California, who has been a member of Congress since 1994 and has been on the House Judiciary Committee most of that time.
I just think it's important to go back to 1998. Only the ranking member and I were here at that time on what we were trying to do with the DMCA. And at the time, we were concerned, and I think rightly so, that there was theft of copyrighted material, songs, movies, and the like. And the protection that was being advanced was to preclude hacking in to that copyright protected material with TPMs. And I was for that. I thought that was a good idea because that piracy was improper and wrong, and this was a way to solve it. At the time, though, I remember raising the issue, what if these TPMs are going to be used to protect non-content? And we ought to address that. And we didn't come to an agreement on that. The compromise was to have the Copyright Office revisit this periodically for relief should that occur. And I think it's been pretty clear that process has not worked perfectly well. In order for them to pay attention to something, there has to be a huge stink in the country. For example, the monopolies on cell phones, people were upset about it. We had a hearing about it, so finally they dealt with that. Other monopolies, we didn't do TPM so monopolies could control products. That was never the intent.
And so knowing that, here's one exchange that gives me some hope that Congress, on a bipartisan basis, might actually be in the mood to do something about this. In this following exchange, you're going to hear from Representative Darrell Issa of California, and he's going to go back and forth with Mr. Corporate Devlin Hartline and then cybersecurity expert Paul Roberts. But you need to understand who Darrell Issa is to understand why this exchange gives me hope. Because truthfully, I generally can't stand Darrell Issa. He generally behaves as a corporate mole in our Congress, and as the richest member of Congress, with a net worth of almost $500 million, he's been a devoted representative of the shareholder class. He also owes his fortune to his success as a car alarm manufacturer. And after watching this guy for well over a decade, I expected him to be on Team Corporate all the way, defending the rights of companies like his to prevent repairs of his products. But that's not what I saw in this hearing. And so here's Representative Darrell Issa speaking to Mr. Corporate and then to Mr. Cybersecurity.
If I remove from my BMW, at least during certain models, I remove the radio, unplug it, and then plug it back in simply because I was fiddling around with the dash, I now have to go back to the dealer to reinstall it. Similarly, the transmission example, I've got two John Deere tractors. One's got a busted engine, the other's got a busted transmission. Currently, they will prohibit you from moving the transmission from one to the other. From a standpoint of intellectual property, where in God's green earth or the Constitution are any of those designed to be rights that belong to the manufacturer rather than rights that belong to the owners of those two John Deere tractors?
So those are a bunch of different situations, and so I think there would be underlying facts that differ with each, right? So we started on the iPhone, and I was going to point out that iPhone will actually give you the tool to synchronize it. In those other situations, I don't know the business justification for it. But if it's not an IP problem, like how is that an IP problem, right? So if that's locked up with the TPM and you have to bypass the TPM, well then that's a violation of 1201. So that's how they can lock.
So what you're saying is that Congress has created impediments to the right to repair. Mr. Roberts, would you say that is correct? That in fact the right to repair, were Congress never to have done anything since George and Thomas were our presidents, so to speak, knowing those two presidents, we'd be able to do things we're not able to do because they're now prohibited by acts of Congress.
Yes, and we certainly know going back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was a much more, first of all, companies would ship products with service and repair manuals, with detailed schematic diagrams, with the understanding that owners would want to replace and service them. And what I would say is, yes, absolutely. I doubt very much, and I know we had members who were here in 1998 authoring the DMCA. I think if you had said to them in 25 years' time, this law will be used to prevent somebody with a broken dishwasher from getting that service by their local repair shop or for fixing it themselves, this law will prevent them from doing that. I doubt very much I would have said, yeah, that's pretty much what we want.
Well, I will tell you that I was the chairman of the Consumer Electronics, what is now the Consumer Electronics Association in 1998, and we did predict a lot of these items were going to be expanded beyond the scope of the original.
And watching his demeanor, it appeared to me that he did not consider this a good thing. In this hearing, you have heard questions, good questions, policy questions, from members of Congress from both parties. But Darrell Issa is a Republican, one of the most shameless corporate tools in the Republican Party, and that's saying a lot. But he clearly sees this situation as a problem and seems willing and in fact eager to put a stop to it, which makes me think this is an opportunity for positive change in a congressional era that often feels hopelessly partisan. And there are multiple bills floating around this Congress that would take different approaches to tackling the lack of rights that we have to repair our own property. And in this hearing, I did tend to be most informed and frankly most impressed by Professor Perzanowski. And he said,
so I think the best solution for Section 1201 is embodied in a piece of legislation that Representative Jones and Sparks introduced in the last Congress, which would create a permanent exception to Section 1201 for repair that would apply not only to the act of circumvention, but would also apply to the creation and distribution of tools that are useful for repair purposes. That does not open the door to a sort of broad, unrestrained creation of circumvention tools, but tools that are targeted to the repair market.
And the bill that he was referring to, the one he likes, was the Freedom to Repair Act of 2022. But unfortunately, it was introduced in the 117th Congress, never moved, and wasn't reintroduced in this Congress. Instead, Representative Sparks introduced the Farm Freedom to Repair Act in this Congress, which would amend Section 1201 to create a permanent exemption, but only for farming equipment. But so far, even her limited version of that first idea hasn't moved. But there are other bills floating around the 118th Congress. Here's cybersecurity expert Paul Roberts.
Proposed right to repair legislation considered by this Congress, such as the Repair Act or last session, the Fair Repair Act, simply ask manufacturers that already provide repair information and tools to their authorized repair providers to also provide them at a fair and reasonable price to the owners of the devices and to third parties that they may wish to hire to do the work.
So that's another approach. But the Repair Act, to be honest, I don't love the Repair Act because it only addresses the motor vehicle manufacturers. The one I liked more was the Fair Repair Act because it's more broad and applies to digital electronic equipment sold or used in the United States in general. But the problem is, unfortunately, neither of these bills have moved either. They're just introduced and sitting there. But there was another bill discussed in this hearing as well. Here's Professor Perzanowski.
So I think if we see passage of the SMART Act, we can anticipate significant reductions in the expenses associated with auto collision repairs. Estimates are that design patents on collision parts are responsible for about $1.5 billion in additional expenditures. We see price premiums on OEM parts over third-party parts often reaching into like the 40% range, right? So these are pretty significant cost savings associated with that. Part of this problem, I think, does relate back to the kind of unique structure of this market. Most consumers are not paying out of pocket for collision repairs. Those costs are being covered by their auto insurance provider, and so the consumer doesn't see that I'm pulling this from memory, so don't hold me to this figure. But the side view mirror of a Ford Fiesta costing $1,500, that's not something that the consumer is confronted with, right? So this goes back to the question of notice. Do consumers know when they buy that vehicle that the repairs are going to be that expensive? I think in most cases they don't. And so I think the SMART Act is a very targeted solution to this problem. I do think it's important to note that the design patent issue for replacement parts is not limited to the automotive industry. I think it's the most, I think that's the area where the problem is most pressing. But home appliances, consumer electronics, we see companies getting design patents on replacement water filters for refrigerators so that they can charge 3 times as much when the little light comes on your fridge to tell you that your water might not be as clean as you want it to be. So I think we have to think about that problem across a range of industries, but the automotive industry, I think, is absolutely the right place to start.
And the reason he says that is the SMART Act, SMART stands for Save Money on Auto Repair Transportation Act. And it seems like a good bill that could make a difference, but it only applies to the auto repair industry. But also, this bill, like the others, hasn't moved in the 118th Congress. And so out of all the right to repair efforts in this Congress, there's really only one that I have any hope for in the 118th Congress. And that's a provision, a part of the National Defense Authorization Act's rough draft. Because Section 828 of the Senate's version of the NDAA for 2025, so this is a bill, not a law yet, but it would require manufacturers who sell things to the Defense Department to agree in writing to provide the DoD with access to, quote, all repair materials, including parts, tools, and information, unquote, needed to diagnose, maintain, or repair the good or service. And the NDAA is signed into law by the end of every year without fail, and so this has a real chance of making it into law. But I gotta tell you, the corporations don't like it. Lobbying groups for manufacturers sent a letter to the House and Senate Armed Services Committee lobbying against the provision, because they say that it would, quote, enable access to sensitive proprietary and trade secret information, unquote. I mean, their letter could have been written by Mr. Corporate himself. They were parroting the same exact talking points. The manufacturers also object to being forced to charge the government prices equivalent to those offered to their authorized dealers, basically preventing these corporations from price gouging the government, which they have been documented to be doing over and over and over and over again. And what's super interesting about the letter is that it's not just defense corporations, the ones that would be affected by this provision, trying to stop the provision. It's all kinds of manufacturers, including ones that probably wouldn't be affected by the military specifically having the right to repair, like the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers and the North American Association of Food Equipment Manufacturers, which tells me that the manufacturers who profit from these repair rights denial schemes are terrified of any movement in the right to repair direction. And so, if we want Congress to grant us all that right, we're going to have to fight for it because there is influential big money pushback rallying right now in Washington, D.C. And so overall, since we're almost at the end of the Congress when all bills that have been introduced but haven't moved are going to die, I don't have a lot of hope for any of the broader bills which would help all of us peasants, becoming law in the 118th Congress. I think the military has some hope. That's about it. And that's because it seems like the bill that really solves this, it hasn't been written yet. Because as you heard, there are lots of bills, but none have gained any momentum. And so this is a work in progress. But also, the election is in 6 weeks. And then we have the lame duck. And I hate the lame duck sessions because they shouldn't exist. Lame duck sessions refer to the period of time between an election and the end of a Congress, which is about 2 months long, when a bunch of people who just got fired as lawmakers get to keep their lawmaking power and they inject all kinds of shit into must-pass laws. And this year, we're on track to have 2 such dingleberry opportunities, the government funding law and an NDAA. And if you are a member of Congress who is transitioning to become a millionaire in the private sector, and you want to show your loyalty to your corporation, this is an excellent opportunity to slip a favor or two into law. And because of this dynamic, this is generally not the time when customer-friendly legislation becomes law. Because stuff that benefits us happens before the election when they want our votes. Lame duck sessions are as far from the next election as it gets. They are the furthest points from accountability. And so lame ducks are the times for corporate favors. I consider them the most dangerous times of any Congress. And so I never have hope for good things in a lame duck. But I do think that there's a decent chance that Congress will keep working on this in the 119th Congress and hopefully write a bill that can be rallied around and moved. And to that end, our experts had some suggestions. Here's cybersecurity expert Paul Roberts.
Both of the things that we're really proposing or talking about here, which would be changes to Section 1201 of the DMCA, as well as passage of robust right to repair laws, would empower a market-based response to keeping the Internet of Things working, secure, and functioning. DMCA 1201 reforms by making it clear that you can circumvent software locks for the purpose of repair and maintenance and upkeep, right? So that would take the threat of a federal crime away from small business owners as well as security researchers who are interested in, plumbing that software for purposes of maintenance, upkeep, and repair. And on the right to repair, by making the tools available to maintain and upkeep products products, diagnostic software, schematic diagrams, service manuals available. Once again, you'll be empowering small business owners to set up repair shops and say, I'm going to keep your smart appliance running for its full 25 or 30-year lifespan, and I'm going to support my family doing that locally, and not be basically choked out of business by a company that says, well, you don't have the right to access this product. From a cybersecurity perspective, that is really important, because one thing we don't want is a population of millions or tens of millions of out-of-date, unsupported, unpatched, insecure, internet-connected home appliances, webcams, home routers out there, available to nation-state actors, cybercriminal groups to compromise and use for their own purposes. And that's something we already see, particularly around broadband routers and other types of devices. And it's a real threat going forward that I think these types of changes would support.
And for what his suggestions are for what he would like to see in whatever becomes the bill, here's Professor Perzanowski.
I think part of what we also need to keep in mind is that sometimes what you need to effectuate a right is to eliminate barriers that stand in the way of that right. So we can think about this, I think, helpfully in the context of tools that enable people to engage in repair. The state level solution has been to require manufacturers to give their own tools to repair shops, sometimes compensated under fair and reasonable terms. The other solution would be to change Section 1201 to say, let's allow independent repair shops to make their own tools. I think both of those solutions have some value to them. I also think it's really important to keep in mind that when we're talking about IP rights, there are always multiple sets of interests at stake. And one of the key balances that IP law has always tried to strike is the balance between the limited statutory exclusive rights that the Patent and Copyright Acts create and the personal property rights of consumers who own these devices. And so I think a balancing is absolutely necessary and appropriate.
And so what can we do to help these ideas become a bill? Well, we still have about 6 weeks left of this election cycle, which means we still have about 6 weeks left of members of Congress kind of giving a shit about what we say. And so what we can do is bring this up to them. Go to a campaign event if you have a frustrating right to repair example running through your head and tell them about it. Or call, or better yet, visit their local campaign office. Or even just email them. But basically, communicate with your member of Congress. Because this issue appears, at least right now, to be relatively free of partisan madness. There's hope here. And by putting a stop to the price gouging that happens up the chain by manufacturers, and by making it possible for us to truly own our own products and be able to either fix them ourselves or pay a repair person who's not affiliated with Apple or the car dealer or Taylor or John Deere or whatever corporation is trying to get paid over and over again for the same product, this would save us all money. And unlike so many other issues that feel hopeless right now, this one doesn't. And so, I think it's worth a try. Like I said in the beginning of this episode, this is the 300th episode of Congressional Dish. And so I want to thank everybody who helped this podcast get this far, especially the people who have been physically working on it for all these years. So thank you to my sister Lauren and to my dad who have been my accountants. Thank you to Claire. I cannot imagine at this point doing this podcast without you. Thank you to Mike, who has been the editor. He works for Pro Podcast Solutions, and we barely speak to each other. He can read my mind. I'm so happy with Pro Podcast Solutions. They've been with me since the beginning. Thank you to Mark, who is our cybersecurity expert and who saved our website once again in the last couple of weeks. And thank you to every single person who has ever donated 1 penny to this listener-supported podcast. I would have quit this a long time ago if I wasn't able to fund my life by doing it. So thank you to all the producers, and thank you especially to our executive producers. Every executive producer is someone who has contributed at least $535 to this show. And every time you contribute that much, you get to put your vouch on an episode of your choice. And Stephen McMahon, who has been a longtime producer of this show, is going to be our executive producer for episode 300. So this one already has an EP credit on it, and I absolutely love that. Yeah, Stephen, thank you for your support, and thank you for everyone's support. 300 feels very good. And actually, this is being released on the 12-year anniversary, or close to the 12-year anniversary. It's mid-September 2012 is when I started the show. So we are now officially at 12 years of Congressional Dish. And like I said, right now, I feel like I'm just getting started. I'm thinking of ways that I'm going to change this for the 119th Congress. Even though I've been doing this for 12 years and I've done this for 6 full Congresses, I still don't quite feel like I'm doing it right. I feel like there's better ways. And so every new Congress is a chance to experiment. But as for right now, my plan is to get us ready for this upcoming election. And then it's my busy season. Then it's the lame duck session. And so, yeah, we'll just get ready and look for whatever corporate favors get slipped into our laws. But yeah, thanks for helping this podcast get this far. And if you want to help it continue, please go to the support page on congressionaldish.com and support the show. That's it for today. Thanks so much, and I will talk to you soon. Oh, and if you're not listening already, go check out the We're Not Wrong podcast. That's where you can hear me more often doing the punditry thing, talking about current events with Justin Robert Young and Andrew Heaton. I love that show, so go check it out if you haven't already. All right, now it's really it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.